All right, let's dive into one of the most unexpected, frankly shocking stories in the entire book of Genesis. This is a story of family drama, betrayal, a really serious broken promise, and one woman's incredibly bold plan to claim the future she was owed. We're going to walk through Genesis 38, verse by verse, to unpack this amazing story of the pledge and the pretender.
So here's how this is all going to break down. First, we'll see Judah try to start a whole new life for himself. Then we'll watch as tragedy strikes and leads to a promise he breaks. From there, we get to Tamar's dangerous plan to take back her destiny, which leads to a crazy high-stakes transaction. And it all builds to a huge public showdown and a birth scene that is just, you'll see, it's wild. Let's get into it.
Okay, so our story kicks off with a major family rift. Judah, who you'll remember is one of Jacob's 12 sons, decides he's had enough. He separates himself from his brothers to go build a completely new life, totally on his own terms. So in verse 1, you can just picture it. Judah literally turns his back on his family's camp and just walks away. It's a clean break. Then, verse 2, he immediately starts putting down new roots. He meets a Canaanite woman, the daughter of a guy named Shua, and marries her. He's making a statement here. He's starting a new family line, totally separate from his own people.
And this new family gets going fast. In verse 3, boom, his wife has their first son, Verse 4, not long after, a second son, Onan, is born. And then in verse 5, a third son, Shelah, arrives. So just like that, Judah has established his own little dynasty. But these three sons, well, they're about to be at the center of a really tragic and explosive family conflict. Right, so just as it seems like Judah's new life is all set up, the story takes a really dark turn. Tragedy is about to hit this family, and it's going to lead to a crucial promise that Judah has absolutely no intention of keeping.
So in verse 6, Judah finds a wife for his firstborn, Her name is Tamar. But then verse 7 delivers this shocking blow. It just says was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. Just like that, a wedding turns into a funeral. And Tamar is left a widow, and even worse, she's childless. Now, for a woman in that time and place, this was a catastrophe. It meant no inheritance, no social standing, basically no future.
So in verse 8, Judah turns to an important cultural tradition. He tells his second son, Onan, okay, it's your duty to marry Tamar and give your dead brother an heir. But verse 9 shows us Onan's selfish thinking. He knows that any child born wouldn't technically be his heir. So he goes through the motions but intentionally avoids fulfilling his duty. And according to verse 10, this really displeased the Lord, who takes his life too. The consequence is immediate and final. And this brings us to a huge moment in the story. I mean, let's just pause and think about this. Two of Judah's sons are dead. Tamar has been made a widow twice over. She's still childless. Her future is completely gone. What on earth is supposed to happen to her now? Everything hangs on what Judah decides to do next. In verse 11, Judah looks at Shelah, his last son, and you can just feel the fear. He has to be thinking, is Tamar cursed? Is my last son gonna die too? So he says to her, go back to your father's house, live as a widow, and just wait until Shelah grows up. But this isn't a real promise. It's an excuse. It's a way to send her away, to put her entire life on pause indefinitely because he's scared.
So years go by, and this is the turning point of the whole story. Tamar, who's been cast aside and basically forgotten, decides she is done waiting. She comes up with a wild, dangerous plan to take control of her own life by confronting Judah himself. Verse 12 tells us a lot of time has passed. Judah's own wife has died, and he's finished his period of mourning. And here's the key thing. His son, Shelah, is now a grown man. The conditions of Judah's promise have been met. But Tamar? She's heard nothing. The promise wasn't broken with a loud argument. It was broken with silence. And the injustice of it is just hanging in the air. So in verses 13 and 14, Tamar hears that Judah is going to be traveling to a place called Timnah for sheep shearing. And this is it. This is her moment. She takes off her widow's clothes, the clothes that mark her as someone in mourning, someone on the sidelines of life. She covers her face with a veil, completely disguising herself, and goes and sits by the road where she knows Judah has to pass. This isn't just a costume change. She is actively shedding her identity as a victim to become the agent of her own future. And now we get to the encounter that changes absolutely everything. The whole story now boils down to one tense negotiation between Judah and this mysterious, veiled woman on the side of the road.
So in verse 15, Judah sees her and, because of the veil, just assumes she's a prostitute. Verse 16, he propositions her. But Tamar is playing chess, not checkers. In verse 17, he offers to pay her with a young goat from his flock. And she says, "Okay, but what will you give me as a pledge, as collateral, until you send it?" And in verse 18, she names her price. And get this, it's not money. She asks for his very identity, his signet, which is like his personal signature seal, his cord that he wore it on, and his staff, a symbol of his authority as a patriarch. And he disagrees and hands them over. In verse 19, as soon as the transaction is done, Tamar is gone. She disappears and puts her widow's clothes back on. Then, verses 20 through 22 tell us Judah sends his friend with the goat to pay his debt and get his stuff back. But of course, the woman is nowhere to be found. And Judah's reaction in verse 23 tells you everything. He says, just let her keep it, otherwise we'll be publicly humiliated. He's more worried about being embarrassed than he is about losing his literal symbols of identity. The evidence is now securely in Tamar's hands. So the trap has been set, the evidence is secured, and now we build to the story's explosive climax. That secret encounter on the side of the road is about to be dragged into the light, and it's going to lead to a dramatic, life-or-death public confrontation. Verse 24 hits us with a time jump. About 3 months later. That's just enough time for Tamar's secret to become physically impossible to hide. The stakes are about to get incredibly high. Someone runs to Judah and tells him, your daughter-in-law Tamar is pregnant, and it's by prostitution. And without even a second of hesitation, Judah, acting as the family judge, delivers this absolutely brutal sentence. Bring her out and let her be burned. The hypocrisy here is just staggering. He is condemning her to death for the very act that he himself committed. But verse 25 is a moment of pure genius. As they're literally dragging her out to be executed, she doesn't scream his name, she doesn't point fingers, she just sends a quiet message to her father-in-law, Judah. And with that message, she sends the items, the signet, the cord, and the staff. She simply says, I'm pregnant by the man who owns these things. Please take a good look. She lets the evidence do all the talking. And this is the showdown, right? On one side, you have Judah's powerful verbal judgment, a death sentence. And on the other side, you have Tamar's silent, physical, and completely undeniable proof. It's his word against his own stuff. Verse 26 is the moral climax of this entire story. Judah sees his belongings, the truth just slams into him, and in front of everyone, he makes this unbelievable public confession. She has been more righteous than I. And he even explains why. He says, because I did not give her to my son Shelah. He admits his own failure, her total justification, and he recognizes that her desperate plan was really a righteous pursuit of the justice he had denied her. But, believe it or not, the story still isn't over. You'd think that's the end, right? But Genesis has one last, very strange twist that secures the family line in a way nobody could have possibly predicted. Okay, so verse 27 reveals Tamar is having twins. Then the birth itself is just chaos. In verse 28, one of the baby's hands comes out first, and the midwife quickly ties a scarlet thread around it to mark him as the firstborn. But then, the hand goes back in. In verse 29, the other brother suddenly breaks through and is born first. They name him Perez, which means breach. And then finally, in verse 30, the brother with the scarlet thread on his wrist is born second. He's named Zerah. The one marked as first comes out second, a perfectly chaotic and symbolic ending to a story that was all about turning expectations completely upside down. And that is the incredible legacy of this story. Through her desperate and risky plan, Tamar didn't just get justice for herself. She actually secured her place in one of the most important family lines in all of history, the direct line that would lead to King David and eventually to Jesus Christ. So it leaves us with this big question to think about. What does it mean when justice comes from the most unexpected places, and the future is secured not by power or position, but by righteous desperation?